Good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever time it is for you. Good, whatever, fill in the blank. You know, it is the middle of the week for me, and it's been okay. It has been raining nonstop since I woke up this morning, but it's been kind of nice, to be truthful. I grew up in a place that didn't get much rain. I live in a place that doesn't get much rain, so there is still this sort of element of novelty to it. If I grew up in, say, Seattle, or if I lived in Seattle, or say maybe someplace a little rainier, more constant, then it'd probably just be another day, or I'd be praying, for sunshine. Like, just please break up the cloudiness, all the gray. But where I am, it is quite nice. It is a very soggy day. And I was at work today. I went to work, I went in the rain, got into my very corporate America office building, just drenched. And I heard someone describe it as soggy. It is a soggy day. And that's how I'm just going to describe rainy days from here on out, because it was indeed quite soggy. But at work, I was sitting there in my very corporate cubicle, slaving away on some very corporate Excel sheets. They did not stand a chance. But I was looking out, of this rain, or out of this rain speckled window, and I was just thinking to myself, I really probably should have studied something different in my undergrad. I'm not sure if this corporate cubicle thing's for me, but I realized that there are certain things, that we need to do, and there are things that we need to educate ourselves on in order to work, to get a job, to support and to provide for ourselves, right? But along the way, I feel like there is an element of ourselves that we're losing a bit through educating our mind. There are things like literature, philosophy, poetry that teach us how to think and how to feel. Now, there is, of course, an absolute need for doctors, for engineers, for farmers, construction workers. Of course there is. They are absolutely essential. The world runs on them. This is what I would classify as the useful. This is what you educate yourself on. You need doctors who know anatomy, engineers that know how to keep bridges from falling down into the water. You need farmers for food. They are absolutely essential. This is what keeps life going, what keeps us alive, and we tend to want to be alive for the most part, I think. And this half, I suppose, is what I would call the practical. The practical half, this is what pays the rent. This is what keeps the fridge and the pantry full. This is what makes sure that the roof doesn't come crashing down on us, Without it, nothing else really stands a chance. But once the utility is taken care of, then I think we can start to delve into the disciplines that sort of help educate the soul a little bit. One of my favorite movies of all time is Good Will Hunting. The writing is superb, the acting is tremendous, and it came out 2 years before I was born. But I love it. I love the movie. It's absolutely killer. But there is this scene where Robin Williams' character and Matt Damon's character are sitting down, and Robin Williams' character describes Matt Damon's character as knowing a lot of things. He could probably sit down and tell him everything there is to know about art. Take Michelangelo. You take his life's work, his political aspirations, his sexual orientation, everything, right? But you couldn't tell me what it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel. That you can move on to women. You could probably give me a list of some of your favorites. A roster, if you will, your favorite attributes, right? But you can never tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and be truly happy. I think this is where a lot of the difference is. This is the heart of all of it. There's a kind of education that fills your head with facts, and the kind of knowing that fills your life with meaning. The useful things give you the first, and in some cases, they can lead into or bleed into the second, but primarily philosophy, literature, art, all the useless things sort of then give you the second. The so-called useless, as I am describing it, and calling these disciplines or sort of these, I guess, channels you can go down as useless does not mean that they are worthless. Let me just clear that up right now. That is not what I mean. It means that they don't necessarily slot themselves neatly into the economy. They don't guarantee jobs, salaries. You can't monetize Homer, the same way that you can monetize, say, a new SaaS that helps you annotate data to help train AI models. They're very different. They're in different camps, And when we pick up hobbies or interests these days, I feel like that there is a draw, to monetize it. Can I make money off of this? And when choosing a college major, you want a good return on your investment. College is pretty expensive, in case you haven't noticed. You want to make sure that you're getting something out of it. To choose the practical, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. Choosing finance and business over dance will probably pay off monetarily in the long run, probably even in the short run, in the short term. But I want to highlight, I suppose, a sort of deeper need for the so-called useless disciplines as being indispensable in a different way. See, philosophy, for example, isn't just about sort of collecting facts for trivia or rote memorization to get an A in class or an A on a test. It's about training your mind in a way to wrestle with these different schools of thought or these different questions that can't necessarily be answered instantly or quickly through sort of a Google search or nowadays through ChatGPT. It's also not useful in the narrow fact that it'll help you fix your car. If you break down on the side of the road whipping out some stoicism, probably won't fix your tire. But it also prevents you from living in sort of this cage that you don't even know about. It teaches you to doubt, to ask, to wonder. Now, as Bertrand Russell put it once before, Russell said, "The value of philosophy is in fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation. Philosophy removes the arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and it keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect." Now, on the other hand of philosophy, there's poetry. While philosophy, in a sense, sort of sharpens, poetry softens. Poetry is an attempt to give language to what is described, to what necessarily cannot be put into words, but damned if we don't try. Dickinson said about poetry, "If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. If I physically feel as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry." Now, while your poetry chops likely won't help to buff up your resume, it serves as a guide for when you're standing in grief, in love, or in awe, and have no way of describing it. It lends itself to show you that someone else has felt that way before and has attempted to put that into words. In a sense, all of this stuff doesn't necessarily solve any problems, but in a way it can solve or at least help alleviate feelings of loneliness. If you pick up the Iliad, you are sitting with people who lived 3,000 years ago, and y'all are still asking the same questions. What is honor? What is grief? What love is worth fighting for? The novelist James Baldwin said, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, all the people who had ever been alive. In a human sense, then, this is everything. To realize that what you feel is shared, to realize that the questions that you have been asking yourself before have been asked before, to realize that you are not the only person wrestling with the weight of being alive. Maybe a good way to think about it is that the useful keeps us alive, and the useless makes us glad to be. Useful builds the bridges. Useless helps us realize why we wanted to get across the river in the first place. Useful pays for the house. Useless helps make that house a home. Even Oscar Wilde said in the preface of The Picture of Dorian Gray that really all art is quite useless. And now he didn't mean worthless, again, but art isn't a tool in the same way that a shovel is, where it helps you dig a hole. It asks nothing of you other than attention. It opens up mystery instead of closing it down. That's the work of the useless, to keep the mystery at the heart of being human. Yes, of course, you should learn the useful thing. Go study medicine, engineering, finance, construction. Learn it all. Pay the rent, keep the lights on, fix the roof. Those things matter. But don't forget the useless. Don't forget how to think and how to feel. Don't forget all the things that make life worth living.